Hey, Internet. Welcome back to another episode of New Foundations, a podcast brought to you by Acropolis, the Bitcoin Treasury company. I'm here with Bobby, Brad, and we have a very special guest, D, from Bitcoin Incorporated. He's the CFO over there, master of coin, if you will. And we're going to have a good conversation today about Bitcoin Treasury and just Bitcoin in general. I think it would be helpful, D, if you could just start us off with a little bit of both your personal and your professional journey in Bitcoin.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for having me. Where did I start without this being too long-winded? My dad was in the Air Force for 30 years, so I'm kind of a bit of from all over the place, but spent most of my time growing up in Las Vegas. There's a Air Force base based out of there. Went to Notre Dame for college, studied finance, so I have a finance background. And it's funny when I think about my sort of Bitcoin origin story, and I don't think I'm alone in this. I kind of kick myself because I feel like I was very primed to get into Bitcoin early. So I try to look back and try to figure out why I didn't. I got into Bitcoin in 2017, so it maybe took me a little bit longer, even though I had heard of it as early as 2012. And when I think about it, I think it's because, as a millennial, growing up through the internet, I naturally just learned sort of not to trust the internet. The internet is a sketchy place. And, hearing about this sort of money of the internet, I was like, okay, I'm staying really far away from that. And I was on like online forums for like video games and things like that. People were talking about Bitcoin, and it was just topics that I wasn't interested about how they were using it. So it sounded even sketchier. But in terms of me saying I was primed for it, I had very sort of freedom-oriented leanings. Really, somebody who was interested at a point in time in people like Peter Schiff, and definitely understood the value of gold and definitely understood the problem with fiat currency. So I think it was just my distrust of the internet as a younger millennial that made me take a little bit of time, but it's interesting how I eventually got into it in 2017. It wasn't really number go up, which I think is the most common way people kind of like are attracted to Bitcoin. It was actually by, learning and understanding and having experience where it was a payment method of only resort. And specifically, in 2017, I was living in Chicago at the time, and I was using an offshore sports book. This is before DraftKings and FanDuel, and now sports betting is all over the U.S. And I was using an offshore sports book, and nothing serious. And we're talking, I didn't have a ton of money. I was betting 10 to 20 bucks maybe on a football game here and there. And I was going through my sort of regular football season, and then end of the year, Super Bowl's over. This was February 2017, and I was getting ready to cash out, and they were like, "Hey, we no longer send checks to the U.S., right? Banks stop the checks, and we also don't do Western Union anymore as well. That's how I was used to doing it. Was actually getting a Western Union payment, which, by the way, I was living in downtown Chicago, and going to a Western Union to get like not an insignificant amount of cash was a really kind of like harrowing kind of experience. So I was kind of like, okay, well, then what's left? There's like all we can send you is Bitcoin. And so it's funny because my first Bitcoin that I received, I got it almost begrudgingly. I was kind of, oh, well, sure, if this is all I got, then, well, if this is the only thing you can do, then fine, just send it to me. And that was February 2017. And what's funny about it is that, and I'm sure you guys remember 2017, I received it. I set up kind of like what a lot of people did, Googled around. I was like, how do I even receive this thing? Set up a Coinbase account and received it. And then I was getting ready to sell it instantly because I had no interest in holding it. And then I was like, well, wait, you know, I'm going to need this. Football season's going to be 6 months. I'll just leave it there, whatever. And from February 2017, I think, to September, it had gone up and appreciated and made more sort of on paper than I had ever made betting sports. And so that was kind of like this really funny aha moment of like, okay, what is going on here? And that was an aha moment, but the bigger sort of light bulb exploding was like, you know what? This was an interesting use case where this was my only payment of only resort. And all the blockers were related to, banking issues. And I wasn't doing anything nefarious. I was a guy betting on, football. And so it was just this moment where I was like, wow, that's really cool that this thing was actually useful. The numbers going up, maybe other people are seeing it's useful, and then I mean the rest is history, right? Then I started listening to like a lot of Andreas Antonopoulos YouTube videos, and I mean I can go on, but very similar. I just kind of dove on in, and then to kind of land the plane here a little bit. At a finance background, I primarily worked in business finance for large media agencies, PR, marketing companies out of Chicago, and just became increasingly after 2017 a huge Bitcoin enthusiast. I started creating my own content online, just educational content, because I was so tired of explaining the same things to my family and friends. I would make videos and then just send it to them, and I was like, well, maybe these videos would be useful for a broader audience. And so became a hobbyist, became a little bit of an educator. I didn't have a very big following, and so this opportunity with BTC Inc. I describe it. It was the perfect professional collision course because, obviously Bitcoin focused company. My background was all finance and only in media. And so, I kind of joke with our CEO, David Bailey, even during the interview, I was like, if you told me from scratch I need to create an opportunity, the best opportunity where I could be the most impactful and useful from a professional standpoint and work in an industry I care about, this would have been the role. So I was really fortunate that that opened up, and obviously I started then, I believe June 2022, and yeah, man, it's been a wild ride ever since. But that's my long-winded sort of background in terms of how we're now kind of talking here today.
No, that was great. So you're saying gambling is good for something.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's funny. Well, it's funny now how it's so like, all over the place. But back in 2017, I mean, it wasn't like hush hush, but yeah, gambling. Exactly. Gambling is a potential orange pill for Bitcoin, and not even sports betting now. And people have a lot of different theories on this, but I mean, I feel like from top of funnel, when you think about the Bitcoin journey, I mean, a lot of people do get introduced for better or worse into Bitcoin through like trading like crypto and altcoins and things like that. And it's a very gambling type behavior that they're chasing. They're just trying to flip a coin, right? And then it's not till you kind of sharpen your pencil and really start realizing that long term it's probably a losing game. I mean, even me, I'm a huge sports fan, huge football fan, but even I have no illusions of grandeur that I'm putting in my day job and I'm going to just be gambling on football. It's going to make me a lot of money, right? You have to understand it's for entertainment purposes, and at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to hold value, the only way to actually um, accrue value to yourself is to hold something like Bitcoin and not gamble it. That's definitely not what you want to do.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you show us around Vegas next year. I'm sure you had a lot of influence in that decision for the conference.
Yeah, you know what? I tried to not be too much of a homer, and I try to be, definitely when the team committed to it, I, definitely kind of shook my pom pom, so to speak. But I definitely didn't want to, sway the decision. And it's like I was there at high school, so like people were like, oh, where's some recommendations? I was like, I don't know, I was 16. I couldn't even go into a lot of these casinos, things like that. And I've been away for so long. I live in Charleston, South Carolina now with my family. So I'm sure Vegas is a much different place today than it was in early 2000s. But I'm super excited to go back. Just Vegas in general is kind of the pinnacle when you think about events and conferences. It's the mecca internationally, and I think as we think about sort of the growth trajectory of the Bitcoin conference, I'm not surprised that we're at a location like that in terms of prestige and in terms of just international recognition. It's the biggest stage, and of course, it was inevitable that Bitcoin would find its way there.
A quick question on kind of your background. So again, fellow Chicagoan out of undergrad from a Midwest school. So definitely, have a deep sense of respect for that city and just again kind of how it formed me in my early years of my career. I'd love to hear more about what you were doing specifically in Chicago, and then how that some of those skills ultimately transitioned to working and being in the CFO office of Bitcoin Inc.
Yeah, so first role out of Chicago was kind of like, a financial analyst role for a communications consulting company out in the suburbs. I was living in Wrigleyville at the time, and man, that commute was just beating me down. I didn't have a lot of money. I had, an old CRV that was barely surviving each winter. And I kind of just threw in the towel, and I was like, I got to work downtown. And, Chicago, kind of similar to New York, just kind of a mecca for, some of the biggest marketing, public relations, advertising firms in the world. And I wanted to stay in business finance. A lot of my fellow colleagues from school who had finance degrees kind of pursued, investment banking type roles. But I never, at least in an academic setting, was very pulled towards that sort of career path. I really wanted to solve business problems. I wanted to be a business person. I wanted to solve real business problems and kind of like be more sort of internal and more sort of corporate finance type facing type roles. So I started in communication consulting, so more PR, and then stayed in PR. Went to Edelman, which is I believe it's one of the largest, if not the largest, public relations companies out in the world. And then worked for Publicis, which was one of the largest advertising agencies. Then went to IPG. So just kind of moved around within Chicago, just taking increasing level of responsibilities and promoted roles, and just kind of getting broad exposure to a lot of different marketing disciplines. So, I had some exposure to event production, which of course very relevant now into the world I am, familiar with here at BTC Inc. And then, on the media advertising side, which is, been especially useful for, my support for the Bitcoin magazine side of the business. So just that broad-based exposure, wearing the finance hat, at these media, event, public relations, marketing focused firms at so a global scale, really gave me just a ton of appreciation and a pretty what I'd like to think is a robust toolkit to help BTC Inc. Take things to the next level. So it's nice for me to be able to kind of like complement that with being sort of what I think is a bit of the tip of the spear and knowing what's kind of going on in the Bitcoin industry and being plugged in on both the event side and on the media side.
Very interesting. So we'd love to know how you approach financial planning and treasury management for your firm, BTC Inc., given that Bitcoin is not just a financial asset, but it's the core of the business.
Yeah, and one of the things I think about for us, and I think just Bitcoin companies in general, is you kind of have to be, or you don't have to be, you have to accept that you're effectively leveraged long Bitcoin. I mean, there's one of the questions we get a lot is, how correlated is our business to the price of Bitcoin? I mean, it's extremely correlated, right? And it's also funny when I think about sort of our business and it particularly being media is hard in general as a business. I mean, there's a reason why, the media landscape is a graveyard, because the media industry, let's remove ourselves from the Bitcoin side in general, gets so disrupted constantly through technology. And there's so much, media, how I also like to describe it, when my parents just ask me, like, what do I do? What is media? It's like, we're just fighting for attention. Everyone is fighting for attention. And now there's so many channels. The attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. So it gets harder and harder and harder when you think about how you commercialize that a bit. And now, you're just seeing a lot more with just like individual creators, things like that. And I think that's the future. I think the old world of the big media company is, I mean, it's dying on the vine. You can see it with all the big media companies we were probably familiar with 20 years ago that are now belly up. So wearing the finance hat for a type of business that is already very difficult to commercialize. Now you wrap it in orange and put Bitcoin around it and that volatility. When David Bailey, when he interviewed me, one of the questions, I still remember this because, it's such a good question, so true. He was like, do you have a gut of steel? Because you absolutely need it. Not only just as a media company, but now as a Bitcoin media company, because you are going to be sort of like front of the ship when it hits those rocky waters, because all of your clients are effectively also leveraged long Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin is going through one of its cycles and it's now the sort of the downward part of it, The first thing they're going to cut is media. They're going to cut media. They're not showing up to the event. Those are all usually discretionary spend that they don't usually invest in unless there's just more market demand. It's just it's business behavior, whether it's Bitcoin or any other industry. And I learned that through all the roles I had in Chicago, where people would I was always on the front line defending our budgets because I knew when times got tough, they're the first ones to get cut. So as a Bitcoin company, you have to be leverage long. You just have to acknowledge your leverage long Bitcoin, and you need to maximize your output when Bitcoin is doing well, because you need to almost have the insulation and expectation that there's going to be volatility. This journey, it is going to be up and to the right, but it's not going to be in a straight line. It's going to be up and down, and so you need to be extremely thoughtful when you think about your financial planning to be able to have some insulation, some treasury to be able to sort of weather that storm when it inevitably comes. So I would say our approach for sure is definitely that we want to be opportunistic when the market is receptive to that, and we also want to avoid kind of getting over our skis and always kind of looking around the corner and knowing that this could change at some point in time. So you kind of have to have a little bit of a thesis of where you're at in the market cycle, and we do that with our financial planning as well. We're planning for Bitcoin 2025. We expect that event to be bigger than Bitcoin 2024. Why? Because we expect the price of Bitcoin in May of 2025 likely to be higher than it is today, with us talking here in August 2024. So you have to have some conviction when you're kind of planning for these types of things and thinking about what stage we think the market cycle will be in. And the last thing I'll say on that point, I always like to say that we should not worry about good problems, but worry about bad problems. And that sounds like a very silly, obvious thing. What I mean by that is don't let opportunity cost, and this is just my individual opinion. I'm sure David or other members of my executive team, we could have a longer discussion about this, but don't let opportunity costs scare you away. Don't say that like, well, if we would only knew that the price of Bitcoin would have been much higher, we could have done so much more. Those are what I call good problems. If Bitcoin ended up overperforming our expectations, well, then that likely means we're in a scenario where our clients are thriving, our attendees are thriving, and it's not something that is worth sort of losing any sleep over. What is more prudent is to make sure that we're protecting real downside, right? And that we don't overproduce the event, for example, or we don't over invest in new sort of media verticals. So you kind of have to have a thesis. You kind of have to just accept your leverage long Bitcoin, and you're hitching your wagon. It's going to be a volatile ride, but you can also be thoughtful and plan for, as I mentioned, what part of the cycle you think you're in today and where you're going in the future. Just do your financial planning sort of around that. But it is more of an art than a science. I will definitely be one to acknowledge that, which as a CFO sometimes makes me a little bit more uncomfortable because that's the side of my brain that doesn't work as well. So I try to make it more of a science, but for sure, our business definitely has a high correlation to the price of Bitcoin, just because that impacts our customers and it impacts our clients. A lot of the spend that they have with us is mostly categorized as discretionary.
Yeah, indeed. One thing I did anchor on, which I think, again, is really important as building businesses within the space, or even just in general, is, over the past, 15 years since during the ZERP environment and things like that, like companies got very, very, very lackadaisical with how they spend capital, how they viewed capital, one, because there was no cost to it. And so I think operating within the Bitcoin space not only is a challenge, but then also the idea of like, if you have Bitcoin on the Treasury, if it's on the balance sheet, like you have to be able to, again, it puts a bit of a governor on the ability for businesses to go hyper growth mode, makes you a little bit more focused on that proof of work aspect, getting folks being able to, fill multiple seats, multiple hats, contribute to the company. And so really think like, I expect in the future that we'll find a lot more companies are anchoring towards that, one, because the tooling is certainly a large component of that, the ability to low code, no code type AI tools, along with the fact that just the ability to pick up skills. I think, we're at the same age, D, and I think, what's amazing to me is, we remember a world with no internet, but we also, really kind of grew up with it. And so our curiosity, and I think I speak for a lot of folks within our generation who've, been able to acquire those new skills, can do it pretty quickly. And so I think, there's a lot more hope versus just putting someone into a square box saying, hey, you're going to be working in finance and that's all you're going to be doing. It's like, no, I can have these other interests and start to add, skills to my toolbox. And ultimately that helps the business by not having to deploy more capital and additional resources, and keeps things cleaner, keeps people, the business in a much healthier position. So love the fact that, it's a Bitcoin philosophy will definitely lean into the idea of, how you all run at BTC Inc., making sure that you have people that can do multiple things and acquire those skills. So very, very refreshing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we are, for all intents and purposes, I mean, we're a professional services company. Our headcount is our biggest line item. We don't, we're not a software company. We're not building things. I mean, we're producing events, but we have partners that help us do that. So, people is that's our biggest line item. And so we have to always operate, whether times are good or bad, with a mindset on just trying to be as lean as possible. And we have an awesome team. I mean, the great thing about being a Bitcoin company is the passion around Bitcoin motivates people so much beyond just hey, I'm just here to get my paycheck. People care about Bitcoin. They care about the mission at BTC Inc., which is Hyperbitcoinization, which is kind of this fancy buzzword for spreading Bitcoin adoption, right? And people are passionate about that, and it motivates them. So people don't mind wearing the extra hat. People don't mind getting up at the crack of dawn every event day and sort of do all the unseen dirty work that people don't see, to put on a production like that. So yeah, so we're really fortunate that we have such an excellent team. And Bitcoin is sort of that propeller, right? People so vested in wanting to see Bitcoin succeed and us succeed in that mission. It definitely makes it, it enables us to be able to operate with a business where people don't mind, like I said, taking that extra mile or taking on that additional role. So but yeah, it's definitely critical, because yeah, when I kept using that phrase, going over skis, I think that's a lot of what we've seen from a lot of companies in the space, is that yeah, you get in sort of grow mode. You just keep throwing bodies into the pitcher, and then when sort of the tide kind of goes out, it's really hard to sort of survive when you became so reliant on that cost base being that high. But BTC Inc. I mean, we've been around for a long time. I mean, it's funny. Bitcoin is just about 15 years old, and I think BTC Inc. has got to be one of the oldest Bitcoin companies in the space. Definitely at least a decade or so, and it's gone through iterations of just booms and cockroach mode, but definitely a testament to David Bailey and crew that still kicking and having gone through all of these different cycles. And that's one of the nice things about perhaps a media business, is that it isn't so overhead intensive. Nobody likes going through a reduction force, and those things are always things we always want to try to minimize under all circumstances. But you never really get caught too offsides with just overwhelming sense of liabilities, because it's really just professional services and people behind it. So I think that's what allows the business to be pretty agile over all of those historic cycles, that a boom and bust that Bitcoin's had in the past.
Right on. Yeah, Dee, I wanted to ask and kind of bring it back to the Bitcoin Treasury for like the small to medium sized business. Like in my mind, it's not a big hurdle to maybe make this decision. You put maybe 1 to 3% in there, and you just kind of take it easy. You don't go too far long. You don't put too much in there. You got to have working capital. If you're in highly unprofitable business with like very low margins, maybe it's not for you. Maybe it's 0.1%. Maybe you don't do it at all, right? But for me, and the businesses that I own, it's like we put a small percentage in it, we set it and forget it, and it just runs, and it makes us money. And then whenever we hit a tight point, because we are holding it long term, we leverage it for getting through a tough time or for hiring or whatever. Like, what would you tell a business owner? Because it may not be that black and white for someone where they're new to this. How do you help someone who's maybe day one learning about Bitcoin Treasury strategy? How do they avoid pitfalls? Like, how do you just start from like 0 to 1, explain like a Bitcoin Treasury to someone?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think I take it for granted so much, our business at BTC Inc. because we receive so much payment in Bitcoin in terms of from like tickets, clients, or whatnot that for us, our treasury strategy, it almost happens a bit organically. But for a sort of non-traditional Bitcoin business, and I don't like using that phrase because if you accept Bitcoin or if you put on your balance sheet, you're a Bitcoin business for all intents and purposes. You become a Bitcoin business the second Bitcoin is on your balance sheet in some form or fashion. So I think, Bobby, what you said, I would echo that. I would say modest is obviously good, and then also long time horizon is critical. The last thing you want is a business owner or a controller or whoever's, handling the books to become a trader. That's always a dangerous spot of like, oh, okay, maybe I'll like you have to have a plan and you have to say like, okay, this is the plan. And this can coincide with how that business does maybe their annual planning or whatever cadence they do it and say, all right, part of this plan, we want to accumulate 1%, 2%, up to 3% in Bitcoin with the plan of holding it for this amount of years and then revisiting and kind of seeing where we're at. So like having that plan and sticking to it. So you're not in that situation where you kind of get punched in the face via some volatility and now you become a trader. And I think that's the worst case because then when you become a trader, you become emotional. When you become emotional, you tend to make, decisions that you otherwise would regret. And one of the things I like to say is that, don't gamble the rent money. So, of course, being thoughtful about, what your liabilities are and things like that, and to determine how much can you allocate in terms of, extra profits, how much can you allocate to that, to a Bitcoin treasury. So you're not tempted to kind of dabble in it or touch it or, turn it into sort of free float working capital when your intention is really to have, a store of value on your balance sheet that can outpace the inflationary effects that you otherwise would be just completely exposed to if all you were doing was just holding U.S. dollars in a money market account or whatever other account. So I would say a plan. You just gotta have a plan. You start modest and have a plan and stick to the plan. And that plan should come with a long-term time horizon to avoid becoming a trader. You don't want your head of finance becoming a trader because like I said, I think that's where people get in trouble.
Yeah. And I guess one of the big hurdles, like at Voltage, we provide Bitcoin payments infrastructure for organizations and enterprises to use. And one of the big things that a lot of folks care about is the regulatory landscape, for instance, and just compliance, reporting, all of these things. I know was it the FASB rules have changed? What is it in 2025 or 2026? There's like fair accounting rules and all this. Like, I'm probably saying something wrong. I'm not an accountant. Forgive me, guys. But can you maybe shed light on that for people who have been maybe like deer in headlights, Bitcoin, but now it seems like it's getting a bit more friendly for businesses?
Yeah, no, yeah. So the FASB rule, I think it's end of this year, maybe. I'm not sure. I can't remember the specific timing. I know it's sooner than later, but yeah, that was a blocker, mostly because prior to that ruling, if you held Bitcoin on your balance sheet, basically you would only record it when it went down. You would have no benefit when it went up. So all your risk was downside when you had to report to your investors or your board of like, hey, our balance sheet now has this impairment because the price of Bitcoin is down. So you would want then the alternative scenario to be able to show when the price of Bitcoin went up, but before that ruling, you were effectively unable to do that. So that ruling definitely, I think, makes treasurers feel better, CFOs, anyone who'd be responsible for it, because now, not a scenario where all they would report is, losses or, negative things. I think that was a huge impediment for people wanting to do it because, and I've said this before, I think on a Twitter space talking about just sort of, Bitcoin for corporations in general. In my experience working with other CFOs, other treasurers, etc., this is probably a very unfair generalization, but I'm going to do it anyways. These are probably the most conservative type, like risk averse people on the planet. Their job, they keep their job by not taking risk almost. So, and the only reason I say that is not to throw any kind of cold water on, Bitcoin showing up on corporate balance sheets, I actually think it's a little bit of the opposite. I think it will become a turn where the pendulum swings, and not having it will be the risky thing. You're going to start answering tough questions as to why is Bitcoin on your balance sheet? It's look how well it's working here. I think the pendulum hasn't swung all the way that way, but the reason I say that is not to be kind of a Debbie Downer. It's more just to kind of like temper people's enthusiasm that this is going to just be a floodgate, because it's a very cultural twitch that a lot of these, like I said, the controllers, treasurers, effectively whoever's responsible for, managing treasury management for a particular business, they need to get comfortable with the risk short term and just comfortable with Bitcoin in general. And from my experience working with them, and just kind of working alongside of them, and I've had so many conversations. I was always even before joining BTC Inc., the Bitcoin guy at the company, and so I've had a lot of conversations with different people on it. I just think they may be towards the back of the line to really kind of like buy in, because they're so risk averse, and because they're not willing to take a risk that makes them look foolish, because effectively, it could cost them their job. But I do think that pendulum will swing where they're gonna have to start answering questions like, why is, compare the US dollars that have just been sitting in some money market account, et cetera, versus what Bitcoin has done in the last sort of 3 to 4 years kind of thing. And then questions will get more challenging, and then I think there'll be a lot more of a pivot. So yeah, sorry, I kind of ran around with that question a little bit, but yeah, in terms of the FASB rule, I do think that will actually that will help. That was one blocker that came down, and then the other blocker that's still out there. This isn't so much with holding Bitcoin in your treasury, but it definitely I think is relevant to voltage. Is just our tax code, and just this sort of apprehension for people to spend their Bitcoin because they don't want to buy coffee and have to report the cost basis, etc. So hopefully the next shoe to drop is some kind of de minimis transaction amount where you don't need to kind of report capital gains for a consumption less than who knows, $500 or less. I'm just kind of throwing out a number. Hopefully that's the next one to kind of happen, because I do think outside of that, it definitely sort of limits Bitcoin as it relates to businesses using it as just sort of more of this store of value treasury like asset, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I would love to see, especially in the ethos of BTC Inc. and Hyperbitcoinization, companies being able to accept Bitcoin for their services, and there being less blockers, because I think it just accelerates that flywheel a lot faster than them having to go on an exchange, go through the KYB process, buying it. That's fine. If that's what they have to do right now, there's nothing wrong with that, because people aren't showing up in droves saying like, hey, I want to not use my credit card, I want to use Bitcoin. That'll happen a little bit later, but it would be great if those blockers kind of came down. And maybe I'm being selfish because I'm thinking more of our business and we're a little bit further ahead of others. And I want to encourage as much Bitcoin spending as possible, because that's effectively our strategy, is that we don't go out and buy Bitcoin, we earn it. And I would love to see more companies being able to do that. But there, and I'm talking specifically Western US based regulations, there's just blockers right now to be able to spend it. And if there's blockers to spend it, then there's blockers to earn it. So hopefully that gets a bit better here. But we'll see.
It's funny you bring that up, because technology definitely outpaces regulation. Because if they do say, if you spend 200 or 500, there's no tax. Well, it's like, well, we've got the L402 protocol and like technology that allows you to pay by the second, by the minute. So ultimately, we never pay taxes on Bitcoin. But I'm not trying to go down that rabbit hole, but it's just interesting what defines the limit. Like, is it for a one-time bill? Is it like a per second bill? Because you could be paying per second $200 a second, and that's like a multi-million-dollar bill. But I digress. I just think it's exciting what's coming.
No, and you bring up also a good point in that regulation is super slow, which is frustrating, because our businesses aren't. We have to go. I mean, we're out there. We are operating, and so regulation is slow. And what's frustrating, and I think we've seen it in our industry a lot, is that they figure it out and then retroactively try to punish people for doing things the wrong way. But it was their own sort of like pace and their lack of agility that was really more of the culprit. I mean, people are in some instances like begging for rules, and that's a whole nother conversation in terms of like, being the Bitcoin ethos. We don't. It's a permissionless, right? You should be able to just spend it, and I absolutely think that, and we should do that. But unfortunately, we do have a regulatory, world that we live in, and they will come and slap your wrist. So. And I think that's also why with the conference there's such a big political overtone, because I do think Bitcoin is maturing. It's now caught the sort of interest of the political sphere, and a lot of that is also because it has been regulated. Many people think quite unfairly, and so yeah, that's just something. It's a reality. I mean, I know as a Bitcoiner, a lot of Bitcoiners just want to say, Bitcoin doesn't need permission. We don't care about politics. Bitcoin doesn't care about politics. Well, politics cares about us, and definitely cares about companies that operate with Bitcoin. So we definitely want to champion and advocate smart regulation. So we're not sort of hindered by rules that don't allow businesses to sort of thrive and use Bitcoin in the way that should be.
Right on.
Unburdened by what has been, if you will.
I was trying not to say it. I was kind of like using words and dancing around it, but yes, that is one way to aptly put it for sure. Yeah.
I want to go back to what you said about CFOs and treasurers, because I was the Bitcoin guy when I was at eBay, and I was on the Treasury team doing everything I could to get Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And the treasurer would always say, "Hey, Mason, it's my job to keep the money. It's not my job to take a risk." And I would try to explain, "Hey, this is what I'm opting for. I'm saying that Bitcoin is the best way to keep eBay's money." And I think helping change that narrative and educate CFOs and treasurers partly is the conference, and we've touched on it. How do you think going to the conference for professionals helps, and do you recommend it? And are you seeing a lot more signups from professionals over the last 5 years at the conference? Just any light that you could shed.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, this conference, Grant, I started in 2022, but I've been familiar with the conference even prior to joining BTC Inc. I mean, it's totally matured in the sense that it's matured around enterprise and business. It started off as what I would describe as a very retail-oriented conference, almost kind of a very festival atmosphere. And it is now, I mean, reflecting on Nashville, which was just about a month ago, definitely we do have a very retail element, and that's not something that we want to, definitely we don't want to get rid of that. It's important. We want this to be we want people to have fun. We want people to congregate and celebrate. It should be a celebration for Bitcoiners. But I would definitely say the interest of just like enterprise, people that want to network, people that are interested in, getting a job, people that are interested in learning about, sort of Bitcoin for corporations, that is increasing, definitely for sure, in terms of the totality of the pie of when we think about our event and our sort of retail focused attendee versus our industry focused. So that is accelerating. I expect that trend to continue to accelerate even further into Vegas as more businesses become more receptive to the idea about Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And, it's hard to talk about that without doing a hat tip to MicroStrategy as the pioneers of really showing how that can work and the amount of unbelievable success that they've had. And now I'm sure you guys are now familiar with MetaPlanet and, our organization trying to sort of replicate that playbook. And it was actually announced at the conference. Our media team has introduced Bitcoin for Corporations, which is going to be a consortium of companies that are interested in doing. So we can actually have a platform and have education materials and bring everybody together that are interested in this. So there's somewhere to go to versus just kind of like figuring out on your own or just trying to do independent research. So we are that is a trend we continue to expect as Bitcoin continues to mature. We're just kind of the wagon right behind it. And yeah, that's why I think the event is tremendously valuable to be able to hear, people like Michael Saylor speak, to be able to hear about other companies that are kind of embarking on this path and what their approach is to adding Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And, Mason, you mentioned talking to, folks on your Treasury team. I mean, maybe if it's not just the one Bitcoin guy at the company that can't sell them, maybe a broader, just hearing other companies that are having success could be more, they'd be more receptive to hearing how it works just by via case studies and examples. And I know you mentioned that he had an issue with risk as well, and I hear that also when I talk to people about Bitcoin adoption, putting on your balance sheet. Risk always exists in everything we do. The keys is to manage it, and this goes back to what Bobby had mentioned. And how you manage it. It doesn't have to be a big position. Right? You can start very small. Start learning about it. Just start small, learn about it, and then kind of build from there. Very rarely, even when you're not talking about Bitcoin for business, you're just talking about Bitcoin as an individual. Very rarely do you jump into Bitcoin. I mean, maybe some people have done this and just put all of your money into it and all your net worth. That's usually not how it starts. I don't think it's any different from our businesses at all. So it's okay to be mindful of risk. Everyone should be, but it's also important to be thoughtful that risk can always be managed in some way or the other. And I think the easy way to manage risk for a company interested in adding Bitcoin to their balance sheet is just a very small position size where the volatility is insignificant in terms of what it would mean for that business. So yeah, so I've kind of danced around that one a little bit, but yeah, the TLDR is that go to the conference. It's very valuable, especially for enterprise, and especially for learning about businesses that are seeing tremendous success deploying the strategy, MicroStrategy being the most obvious one.
Yeah, indeed, I can confidently say that like just the overall just attendee profile is evolving dramatically. Like I think, reflect on just being in the space for a couple cycles now. It went from much more like hardcore kind of libertarian mentality, people not dressed up in suits, to like you have people for 30-year experience from Charles Schwab and traditional finance showing up that are really seeing this opportunity. Number one, I think they see the problems that exist currently for businesses in the world, but they also just see the opportunity to help other enterprises and things like that, and whether that be on the retirement side or whether that be for business balance sheets, kind of a corporate use case. What's amazing to see is it's this microcosm of just young and old all kind of coming together. I mean, you look at the folks like Dylan LeClaire at Metaplanet, obviously very deeply involved at BTC Inc. as well, but then also like folks like again Larry Lepard and then Rich Kerr and all these people coming together that have a variety of different ways to really showcase the value of this asset class. And it's different than the old days of Bitcoin conferences where they were much smaller, and again the discussions were a lot different, and now it's becoming a bit more, we'll call it, established. And I think that's something that's very positive for the industry, and eventually will provide a lot more value to the ecosystem.
Yeah, and right, look no further. We were talking earlier. Who would have thought? I don't know if you guys were Bitcoin 2019, smaller event in San Francisco. But who would have thought in 5 years there'd be a golf tournament at these Bitcoin conferences? I think just that alone, that a golf tournament was added to it as a side event, really shows you the maturation of this space and how enterprise is kind of here. Not to pick on golfers and stereotype too much, but yeah, I think it's a great thing. And here's the thing: the libertarian side of it, that sort of like grassroots side of it, that side is awesome. It's not that one thing is replacing another. I mean, this is the sort of path that Bitcoin inevitably at some point was eventually going to take. It was never going, if this technology wasn't as important and as transformational as we all know it is, then it would have only stayed as this niche, weird internet libertarian thing. But because it is so transformational, it's just embarking on this journey where that notion of broad adoption, the hyperbitcoinization as we call it, BTC Inc. It's going to start bringing in people from all different types of walks of life with all different political ideologies, whatever. And, people can have different reasons for why they're interested in it. Maybe it's because you have very large libertarian ideals. Maybe because you work on the enterprise side and you're trying to understand how do you protect the, value on your balance sheet. So Bitcoin is going to, it's just kind of eventually consume everything and everyone and attract people for different reasons. And I think you just see, over that 5-year span for Bitcoin 2019, small retail focused event, with a lot of like libertarian ideals, cypherpunk type of like focus, to now sort of, a lot more suits and ties. I mean, it was eventually always going to kind of happen this way. And yeah, I think it's great. I think it means that Bitcoin is winning and Bitcoin is becoming more and more understood and broadly adopted. And there's still so much more room to go. I don't think we're even close to, that far off from the starting line, to be frank.
We're definitely in the midst of hyper-Bitcoinization. It is happening right now. It's not something that is a future event. It's happening right now. And you mentioned managing risk, and Brad always likes to say that possession is not 9/10 of the law in Bitcoin, it's 100% of the law. So we're curious to know, how do you guys approach custody at BTC Inc. and do you have any insights to share there?
Man, this is such a great question because I think about this like almost like all the time because I constantly draw parallels to me individually as a Bitcoiner, my Bitcoin and how I custody and the value of self-custody, not leaving on exchange, and how my sort of like personal views kind of go over to the corporate business side. And it's tricky because it's not one for one because the CFO or BC Inc., I can't put my company treasure or Bitcoin treasury on like a Trezor in like my drawer, right? Because there's different types of governance. This is a business. This isn't just one person. For a lot of reasons why you can't just put it on just like a single like hardware device. So what's fantastic is that you have so many great partners, Unchained Capital. Shout out to Bobby wearing the hat that we've partnered with to as a solutions provider to help solve this kind of quirky problem around self-custody for business where you can't go to your board of directors and tell them, hey, here's our plan for self-custody, right? He's got 12 seed words. He's going to, put it in his daughter's bedroom. You can't have some weird, strange, high risk approach. You have to have, and I really think the approach is some collaborative custody model where you have multiple sort of key holders. It segregates the risk, it disperses it, and it's got to be geographic as well. You can't have all the keys and all the, with all, for example, all the officers all in one place. You should distribute it geographically. And I'll also say there's no perfect answer. It's going to be bespoke for every different company, right? Maybe for a small business that just has 1%, maybe just a single hardware device and knowing how to use it is not a bad thing. So actually, I don't want to disparage that, but just speaking for BTC Inc.'s point of view, this is just something that we're constantly looking at. We're looking at, companies like Unchained, other companies in the space. I think like BitGo is one of them that we just want to see like what is their offering and how can we best work, how can it best work with us? Because we're also unique in that, we use Bitcoin, we pay vendors with it, we pay employees and contractors with it. So we need something that is both almost kind of like a cold wallet in terms of like your more complex collaborative custody, but also some that we can access quickly when we need to sort of deploy capital. So it's a very evolving. I think there's a lot of space for some kind of almost like Bitcoin ERP system. I don't think anyone's going to build that soon because I just think we're just a very unique business because how much business we do with Bitcoin. But yeah, our approach at BSync is really, collaborative custody, working with a partner that has built tremendously great and reliable products, and then just having a plan around, minimizing as much risk for losses as possible. And that's, dispersing it across officers, dispersing it geographically as well. We are a remote first company, so that's not hard to do, so that there's no singular point of failure, right? You can't, we don't, our treasury doesn't go up in flames because one person lost it, things like that. We can go to our provider to get a recovery. We can rely on some other key that another officer will have. So that's been our approach, is really kind of like, I think collaborative custody is probably the right way to go if you're starting to build up a meaningful Bitcoin treasury that would be damaging to lose in any way. But I also kind of ramble because it's not done. I think this is going to be a space that will continue to evolve. People will continue to do tooling, and I'm definitely, all eyes and ears whenever I hear somebody kind of doing something in this space, just to see if there's something that could even work even better for us.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about custody is it is an ever evolving space. D, I think we started off with just seed phrases on paper wallets, and then that eventually evolved into single signature hardware wallets, and then obviously the evolution of multi-sig, and it was more personal multi-sig versus a collaborative format. And then even now, since like when you hammered on it a little bit at the beginning is just like the governance controls around this stuff. And I think when you look at boards of directors and the ability to go move assets, they want to make sure that there's 4 or 5 different layers of that. And so I know with OnRamp and Acropolis, and again the multi-institutional custody model, which again it's also taking the the hardware devices and getting those out of the hands and just again trying to put an insurance wrapper around more or less accounts from institutions holding the keys. That's another form of custody that's ultimately going to evolve into the space. And I know at Acropolis we spend a lot of time thinking about that, but know that there's tons of different custody models out there, and some are going to be right for very, very small businesses, and others are going to be right for enterprises. And there's also a variety of different we'll call it future opportunities that custody will evolve into. And again, we're excited to kind of see where the industry evolves to, and hopefully be on the bleeding edge of that as well. So
Yeah, no, I think when you think about Bitcoin for corporations, that's absolutely essential and critical. We talked about risk and managing risk, right? If you don't have a thoughtful answer, a thoughtful solution to your treasurer about, well, how do I even hold this stuff? I mean, it's probably gonna be dead on arrival. And so I think it's fantastic that there's so much innovation in this space right now, because it's going to be sorely needed. And that's not to disparage, the folks already in it. I think there's great tools available, but the floodgates will open as more and more companies want to understand how they can put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And I think there's such cool things that are happening. Like I love, going back to that type of conversation, Brad, you have with like a board of directors, like ways to, for example, thresholds where you only need one signer at a certain amount, and if there's a larger threshold, now you need to involve other signers, maybe members of the board, and it actually makes it, it can be done. And this is what's cool about Bitcoin as money that's a technology, is you can make it in such a way that there's actually more controls and more governance within your company on how Bitcoin is, moves more so than even initiating wires at a bank, right? You can actually be more dynamic and be more secure at the same time. So yeah, a lot of cool stuff happening. I think so far we've only kind of seen the tip of the iceberg with it. But we're like I said, we're always eyes and ears. I mean, I don't like to always tinker with our processes too much, because it takes man and woman power to kind of get things up and running. But if there's always a better solution, we are always kind of curious to know what's going to work best for us, for sure.
Any final questions, Bobby, Brad? I think that's just about it for me. It's been a great rip.
No, yeah, this has been good. It's exciting to chat through, and yeah, we appreciate you being on. What about you, Brad?
no, I think maybe deep. Maybe you can talk just to kind of close things out. Like, where do you see BTC Inc? Again, obviously, there's all the events international that are going on. Would love to hear kind of like a Rolodex or at least a calendar of the remaining parts of the year. For folks that are listening internationally, I know you guys have been really investing heavily in that. Love to hear kind of like the future plans. Obviously, Vegas next year for the Bitcoin conference, but anything beyond that would be happy to give you the floor to let people know where to attend an event and get involved.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks, all you guys for having me on. I mean, I can kind of talk endlessly about Bitcoin, obviously all the things we're kind of doing here. So I appreciate it. And so in terms of looking at kind of like the future calendar, I mean, this year is loaded, right? I mean, we did Bitcoin in Hong Kong was in May. We just did Nashville in July. We have Bitcoin Amsterdam. That's the next event. And that's in October. And then we have Bitcoin MENA in Abu Dhabi in December. So definitely loading the event calendar for sure. And obviously, if you're able to make those, I mean, of course, I'm going to be the biggest advocate, because each one of these events, it's not even kind of a been there, done that. And what's been really cool about these events, and we always knew, if we were talking about hyper-Bitcoinization, broad adoption, you can't just only throw one event in the US, right? Because what's so cool about Bitcoin is it is how it's viewed and how it's used, and how people are attracted to it varies so much geographically. I mean, I think, for example, attendees and let's say people familiar with Bitcoin, let's say like in Africa or maybe in South America, if they showed up at that event in Nashville, I mean, I think they absolutely still have a great time, but the talks would be a lot more foreign in terms of like why they're interested in Bitcoin, right? Maybe more as sort of like protection against like currency debasement versus something you put on maybe like a balance sheet. So what's cool about doing these in different areas, is you get to have different flavors of the different conversations around Bitcoin all across the world. We saw that in Asia quite a bit. And I don't mean to generalize. These are just kind of like how we see the programming, what we're hearing from our customers in those areas. Asia, definitely there is a lot more sort of enthusiasm around sort of like the number grow up side of it, the trading side of it. There's definitely a heavy interest in things outside of Bitcoin and the broader sort of like crypto space. So there's that heavy part. Amsterdam, what's coming up in October, it's definitely more a heavy like developer type culture over there. That sort of that cypherpunk origin is definitely, I think, still very heavy in Europe, which is awesome to see. And in Abu Dhabi is blank slate. So we're very curious to see like what type of event comes together from Abu Dhabi. Obviously, there's whispers about, sovereign adoption could be a heavy component of that. So that's obviously very exciting. So that's the calendar like through this year, and then next year obviously we have Vegas, and we're going to constantly evaluate, where else we can go. I like to describe it as the traveling circus. I don't know if my team likes it with that sort of type of description, but I mean it in a way that, it's a fun thing to go to. We want to make sure that we can reach as many people as possible. We do see at these events, the overwhelming amount of attendees are within that immediate region, and we're talking like 80% or higher. So while we do have people that travel, we also are incredibly mindful of how expensive it can be to book a flight, book a hotel room, buy your ticket. There's definitely a lot more cost for our attendees than just buying that ticket. So we try to be as thoughtful as we can be, and I think the best way to do that is just meet them where they're at, right? And so I think we'll constantly keep our ear to the ground, see what markets we can sort of host the event and organize the event, and just kind of keep spreading this thing we keep calling Hyperbitcoinization at BTC Inc. And yeah, more to come next year. I foresee more of us sort of moving around, and sometimes that's even to not our detriment in the sense that like it's bad for us, but more it's more work for us. When you move an event, you're almost starting it from square one. You have a new venue, new marketing strategy. So we embrace that challenge because we understand what our mission is, and it's not just to throw one event in Miami forever or one event in Nashville. So we will continue to throw more events globally, and yeah, we're excited to do so because, like I said, we're mission oriented, and we know it's important to keep spreading the good word here.
Well, hey, man, we could also talk about Bitcoin all day, so don't feel bad about it. Hopefully we'll see you. I'll get to see you in Amsterdam, Abu Dhabi at the second annual Bitcoin Golf Championship in Vegas next year. And it's been a great rip, and thanks for coming on.
Yep, absolutely. Appreciate it, guys. Great talking to you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, D.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the show. Quick reminder that New Foundations is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing should be construed as investment, financial, or legal advice. Business owners, business operators, and those who are Bitcoin curious, let's connect. Visit acropolistreasury.com to learn more or to get in touch with our team.